Great, so we will, just to give you a little overview, we will start with Eden and some project updates. She's been out doing some field work, so we're really looking forward to hearing back. We're going to go over the Stoughton survey that was taken. We got about 116 responses, which was pretty good. Good incentives. I think there were $300 gift cards that seemed to help. And then we'll talk about what's ahead. And then curious to hear about some of the work that's going on for you all in the climate action team. So if there's any updates that are boots on the ground, so give us any updates that's going to intersect with the work that we're doing, and talk about what we can bring to the community to learn more about climate action, building climate resilience, and things that we can do to be more interactive with the community. And we'll be off. Yeah, that. All right.
Okay. So since December, we have made quite a bit of progress on some of the technical aspects of this project. So I'm just going to go over those, kind of quickly, and basically explain what's been going on and what's planned for the near future. If you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. I'm more than happy to answer anything. Next slide. So just a quick reminder of what the kind of plans or the goals for this project are before we get into things. Number one is to create an inventory of all of the culverts in Stoughton, which we will then prioritize based on structural information, ecological sensitivity, flood risk, and demographic information. And then using that prioritization plan, we can identify which culverts are most in need of upgrades and then come up with preliminary budgets, plans, and funding plans. So some of the work that's being done in pursuit of that. Number one, culvert inspection. These are coming up soon. They're going to happen sometime in early April. We haven't fully nailed down a date yet. But basically, these are going to be relatively quick inspections. These are not going to be the full structural inspections that are coming next year. The culverts, some of them are underwater, some of them are really small. So what this is going to be is we're going to collect some basic information about the size, materials, stuff like that, and then we're going to basically figure out if we can just walk through it and inspect it that way. We need to send CCTV or full-on dive team, like in scuba suits.
Are these under roads exclusively?
Yeah, for the most part.
Okay.
There are some anomalies in the map, which I'm not going to get fully into that because a lot of it's very GIS specific, but we did try to focus on ones that were mapped near roads, and most of the time these culverts will be under roads, potentially some under train tracks, I think, but that's primarily where they are. Something that we are doing both to inform the inventory but also the inspections are a base map. So basically what this is using mapping software, we pulled in the town's existing inventory of culverts, and then we overlay that with specific maps that that speak to those prioritization aspects that I mentioned earlier, which I will be going into. And that gives us an idea of which culverts fall into specific categories. So like I said, we're evaluating flood risks, ecological sensitivity, and social and demographic vulnerability. And I'm going to get into more detail about all of those categories. So next slide. This is a fully zoomed out version of the base map. It is not very usable in this state, so I'm mostly showing it just for fun, because there are a lot of different layers, but every single one of these is information that we are incorporating into the inventory that will inform the prioritization plan, and I'm going to explain what all of these mean. Next slide. So, yeah, I know, it's a lot. The first major category that we're looking at is flood risk. This is extremely important. Culverts are, a flood prevention strategy in part. So this is a very important thing that we want to get a good idea of. And we have a few different criteria that we looked at. So the first is going to be FEMA flood zones. A lot of you are probably familiar with this. These are based off of flood insurance maps. Those different colors that you see on that top photo represent different, basically, flood zones. So those are different intensities of storms that have different probabilities. And so basically we recorded any culvert that falls into one of those flood zones, you recorded that it falls into them, and then what intensity of storm. We also looked at a town-wide flood model that was completed by Kleinfelder in 2023. So FEMA maps are great, they're reliable, they're widely used, but they're only based on historical flood data. They can't necessarily predict what future flooding is going to look like, which we know is going to be exacerbated by climate change. So this model is really useful because it predicts as accurately as possible flooding in the year 2070. And some of these culverts were actually incorporated into the model. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So similarly, these colors indicate different flood depths. That kind of bright pink is the deepest in the year 2070. So we recorded all culverts that fall into these mapped flood zones and then the most severe depth that they fall into. Next slide. So we also looked at flooding on roadways specifically. This is also based on the 2023 flood model that we performed, but I filtered the results to only look at flooding that was happening on roads. This is not a perfect metric because ultimately, especially for the culverts that weren't incorporated into the model, there's no way of telling if undersized culverts are causing the flooding, but it's still an important correlation that we wanted to look at, and it's still, one of the 4 flood metrics that we're including, because culverts are supposed to help prevent roadway flooding. And then the very last flood metric that we looked at was actually based on the survey that you all helped to populate and circulate. So any culvert that was within 200 feet of one of those survey flood points, we included that. So that was super helpful. We got a lot of really good responses. So really good data that helped inform this. Next slide.
If I may,
Yeah.
the flooding is happening more and more these days, and it's not, I don't know if your historical references are good, because it's, global warming is creating more rain and so forth. Is that being adjusted? Is that being considered?
Yes. So the one that you see like above with the kind of polygons that are different blue and cyan colors, those are, I don't fully understand how the modeling works. I'm not a modeler, but those are taking into account future rainfall projections, and they're modeled to predict, I guess. Predict is not really the best word because no one can predict exactly what the flooding is going to look like, but they kind of give as good of a picture as we can of what future flooding will look like. So that it's actually not indicative of current flooding at all because it's tuned to the year 2070. They also looked at flooding for 2030, but we didn't incorporate that into this specific project. Next slide. So another major category that we looked at is ecological sensitivity. So streams are obviously very important ecosystems for a lot of aquatic organisms, and those ecosystems can be really damaged when a road cuts them in half. But something really cool about culverts is they can actually prevent a lot of that ecological damage, but only if they're properly sized and fit other specific design criteria like the substrate. So you can kind of see this is an example of a really well-designed culvert for these stream crossings. I don't actually know where this is. This is just pulled directly from some of the Massachusetts guidance, but as you can see, it's large. The water is pretty deep, so it allows for a more natural flow. There's rock, so it provides good habitat. So that's ecological sensitivity is definitely something that we are going to consider, especially as we collect more data about the culverts themselves, and it's something that we incorporated into the base map.
Is it easy enough to, you don't have to go into it if it's complicated, but if these go under roadways, does runoff not cause more ecological damage?
That's a really good question, probably. But I think, I'm admittedly not an expert about this, but I think the idea behind this is that the runoff is going to hurt that part of the stream regardless, so at least this is mitigating, the other effects, like the fact that, the fish can't travel all the way and the, ecosystem otherwise becomes split in half. That's a good question, though. I'm sure that there are nature-based solutions that you can use to mitigate that. I'm not sure that's probably something that we're going to be looking into once we identify the culverts that, are actually on stream crossings and then need these extra considerations, but that's a good question.
So interesting, because I've never really seen one that there are so many rocks and things, and it really does become an ecological habitat. Is that intentional, and they've placed some of that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
from
that's
what
incredible. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, from what I understand, I'm not sure how that's definitely something that we're going to be looking at for future design. I'm not sure what extent, to be completely honest. It's going to depend on other considerations like budget, the actual stream itself. But I think this is kind of the ideal of what a culvert can be in terms of preserving that.
Yeah, so any new culverts that get installed, DEP has culvert design guidelines that they need to follow this type of structure where they provide that habitat, and not just putting a pipe under the road.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's really the best management practice.
Yeah, they really
That's
encourage these type of designs.
Nick, what's the diameter of the culverts that you're doing?
I mean, they vary, it really depends on the flow that's going to them, that's what determines the size of them.
Because that looks pretty big.
Yeah, that one is a pretty big one, I mean, can't really tell, there's nothing to give it, too much perspective, but it does seem fairly large. And those kind of open bottom culverts, not the full circle pipes, is a lot better, so that the arch is where the bottom stays natural. Yeah.
If there are no more questions, we can.
Is there a point where a culvert becomes a bridge, or is there like a borderline to say this is considered a bridge now?
I don't know. Unfortunately, I'm not sure. That would probably be a better question for one of our engineers who unfortunately could not make it today. And I'm sure that's addressed in the guidelines, which I have not refreshed myself on in quite a while, because that's something that we're going to be incorporating into the prioritization more. Once we actually have dimensions for the culverts, we can't really do much with this information quite yet until we have more information about the structural integrity and the dimensions, because a lot of those regulations are about size, and so we just don't know for all of them yet.
You don't?
But some of the things that we are looking at, so number one, we are marking all culverts that are within 20 feet of a United States Geological Survey stream, so these are basically just larger streams, large enough to be named. And the reason we're doing 20 feet is just to account for any inaccuracies in the mapping software. And then a similar, so you can see that green line that's running through, that's a USGS stream. We're doing a similar thing for all NAACC, which is the North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity Collaborative stream crossings. It's similar to the USGS stream, it's just a stream crossing that's been identified by the NAACC. You can see that cross, that's the same culvert, most of them end up being both, but not all. So that's also something that we're reporting for the relevant culverts. Next slide. The final, the final category that we're looking at is social vulnerability. So this is becoming a pretty big priority for at least a lot of states, the federal government, it depends on the administration, but is sort of correcting past injustices where specific groups are more exposed to environmental hazards than others. And so Massachusetts has this really cool data set called Environmental Justice Communities, which is based on census tract information. And it basically, a community is considered an EJ community if they meet a certain threshold for a percent of the population that's low median income, a percent of the population that is BIPOC, or a high percent of the population that is non-English speakers, or some combination thereof. So you can't really see it because of the color, but pretty much all of Stoughton is an EJ population. There is like one square in the kind of top that isn't, but there just happen to be no culverts that fall into that, so it ends up actually not being a super useful metric for prioritizing some culverts over others, but it's really important for us to know, first to just consider, because it's an important thing to think about, but also because this is something that the state is really heavily prioritizing for funding, depending on the grant program. Next slide. Another very similar metric that we're looking at are something called Federal Justice 40 Communities, or Justice 40 Communities. It is a federal metric. It's very similar to EJ communities in that it looks at demographic information, but it also incorporates exposure to environmental hazards. This one actually, not all of Stoughton is. So Stoughton has two, but they're adjacent, so they look like it's just one. But one of the areas is disadvantaged by traffic proximity and volume and low income. And the other one is linguistic isolation and a low high school education rate. So those are the two metrics that we are looking at to basically give us better insight into the important social demographics for the community surrounding all of these culverts that we're looking at. Next slide. So basically, that's what we've been looking at.
There's a seat at the very end there on the right.
All of these are being recorded for each culvert. They're going to inform our prioritization. The scoring itself hasn't been finalized. It's probably going to end up being a pretty simple system of, each category that any given culvert falls into gets a tick, and the ones with the highest tick weighted against something will end up being the highest priority, including also the structural information. But then that is what we're going to really heavily look at in terms of prioritizing which culverts are going to eventually be upgraded. So that's what's been going on. Any other questions? I know I kind of breezed through that.
What is the end goal in terms of narrowing down? Or is there like a pool of funding that you're targeting so you can have only so many for the pool of funding, or is it a certain number?
It's more, I don't know what the end up final number is going to be. It's probably going to be around 10 or 15. It is mostly related to funding. There are certain state and potentially federal grants that we're planning on going after. Not sure which ones yet, because that's something that we're going to research down the line, but there are funds specifically for culvert improvements. But yeah, essentially it's just, limited funding, potentially limited budget. So these are the ones that are most in need of prioritization. The town, I'm not sure what's going to happen to this list once, we've produced it, once we've looked into funding, and once we've started to pursue projects. It's very possible that the town will continue to go down the list, but for now, these are going to be the top ones that are, it's most critical that we address them soon.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anything from the town to add, or?
I think I would just build off of that with, as far as identifying the culverts, like you said, prioritizing them. It's good for us as the town to have that list so that we can go after funding to try to start correcting these problems, so that we don't, we gotta know what the problem is before we can go get the money to try to fix it, or try to do it ourselves, if we can't get the funding. So this is a great, tool to have to get that list, developed.
Do they then get put in like a spreadsheet and they're ranked and?
There's already a big spreadsheet that has I don't even know how many columns at this point that has every single thing that I just mentioned, either a yes or no for the things that are just, does it fall in this area or no, or for the ones that have more specific information like the flooding, it'll have, yes, it falls into it, and then the specific flood depth, and then, what other relevant information. And then just a few other things that aren't necessarily related to prioritization that we just use to kind of streamline the inventory. It's a large spreadsheet, but eventually it'll be a really useful tool.
And it's good we had the flood study before that, to use that
Yes.
data.
Right.
That has been
Fall
critical.
right to
Yeah,
line with this for the MVP town.
definitely.
Yeah, the flood study is actually really good because, like you mentioned, the FEMA maps kind of show what's already happened, and the flood study kind of predicts what may happen in the future, so that we can work towards that. So the two in conjunction are really good to utilize.
Definitely. Yeah, it's important to look at both.
Did you know where the USGS gauges are that measure kind of the flow of water through the watershed in this region?
I don't off the top of my head. I'm sure that will come up at some point once we're done with the field investigations, but off the top of my head, no, I don't.
Any other questions? Okay, awesome, work to come.
Definitely.
So next, come on, it's the G. Next up is,
I appreciate that.
is we wanted to go over some of the highlights from the community survey that you helped distribute and populate. So even considered the maps that and the flood points and important critical resources and infrastructure that people reported, and we thought we'd go over some of the other pieces of information we got. So at the December meeting, we heard from this group that the education that we're providing, across this community and others, really needs to use language that's understandable. That information needs to be distributed to different audiences in different ways, because they use different media, different generations, different, just people are getting their news and trusted information from a lot of different sources than they have traditionally. And then the last key takeaway was we really should be actively recruiting youth into this effort. And so I think as we move forward into the next phase of this project, that's something we're going to try to do more of. And I I'm starting a list of terminology that we frequently use in presentations like this that really need to be broken down. Because resilience can mean a whole bunch of things to a whole bunch of different people, and so, and even climate change. If there are terms that you hear in this presentation or other presentations about climate change, and please let me, shoot me an email, send them to me, because that my goal is to come up with better ways to describe some of the things that we're trying to get across to people. So immediately after the December meeting, we launched an online survey. And what we're trying to get was, what are the education needs in the community about climate change and climate adaptation, and what news sources are used by Stoughton residents. So we learned that people hear about it from different places. So this is sort of a representative sample of what we heard. People separately reported that they heard about the survey through the physical flyers that were posted up around town in public buildings, through the Council on Aging, the town website, the emails, the newsletters, I think that NEPA sends out, and Facebook. We have done a paid Facebook ad to try to make sure that people in Stoughton were seeing it prominently.
For text message, you need somebody's telephone number, right?
Correct.
How do you get that?
So
Or don't you?
Yes, I don't have them, so people are reporting that that's how they get their information. So I wonder if they're saying, I get text alerts from my town if there's a storm coming or there's a water main break.
I wonder if people forwarded it to friends by text.
Could be, yeah.
Or if it was that late.
So we talked. Oops. So we also asked, what is it, given the climate impacts that we are expecting in this region, what are folks most concerned about? And these were the top ones. So people are concerned about impacts to natural resources, to the different, those who are disproportionately affected by those impacts, whether because of their age or their health conditions, and then municipal structures and services, so roads, the ability to move around, services from like energy. So then we asked more specifically about those impacts. So when people think about public structures and services, they're most concerned about disruption to energy systems. And I used this graphic last time and somebody asked me when it was from, and it's from 2022. So damage to homes and apartments and interruption of water supplies were the top reported concerns.
Can I just ask you?
Yes.
The prior slide said 9,000 people without power in Stoughton this heat wave winds down. What does that mean?
So this, I took this from, I think it was Mass, it's an online newspaper.
Okay.
So there was a heat wave in 2022.
This was historical.
Yes,
Okay.
this is from
Oh.
2022.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Anybody
Yeah.
remember that vividly?
It's funny.
Is that households or people?
It said 9,000 people.
Thanks.
That's what was reported.
Okay.
So when we asked more broadly about services that might be disrupted that people were concerned about, these were their top responses. So access to food and water, emergency services, being able to get to where they needed to go, and then residents' access to medical services. When we asked about social determinants and social vulnerabilities of those who are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change, respondents were most concerned about seniors, people with health conditions, and people with lower socioeconomic status. When we asked about concerns about climate impacts to natural resources. People were most concerned about air quality, water resources and streams, and the impact to wildlife. And then when we asked about what climate change education needs, what do people want to know more about? These were the top responses. So what can people do at home? What are some of the more community-wide or broader reaching opportunities for resilience that they can become involved with? How do we keep the cost of adaptations down? Because especially if you're talking about a homeowner or a tenant, like there are definitely going to be things that you can't do because they're just cost prohibitive. Flood reduction. People want to know how flooding can be reduced and how to protect the electric grid.
How about cost of electricity at this time?
What was that? The cost of electricity? So who responded to the survey? So most of the respondents self-identified as white Caucasian, and they live in town. So given the demographics of Stoughton, we didn't reach a lot of people. And so that's one of the things we really want to do. Like, where can we find people? How, what messages are going to resonate with people? Because there are competing priorities for everybody in everyday life. Not everybody is thinking about climate change and climate resilience every day, but it is important and it will impact people's everyday lives, even if they don't connect it with climate change. So how do we make that connection with them?
If you give the survey in English, you don't expect Portuguese people who only speak Portuguese to respond.
Well, we did do a Portuguese survey as well.
Okay.
So we did have it translated into Portuguese.
Any other languages?
Not any other languages
Okay.
For this project. So does anybody have any questions first about that? It's a very high level look at the survey. This information is going to be put on the project website so that you can take a look at it. You can look at the survey questions specifically, and I've got nice charts that say what the respondents gave us.
How did we compare to other communities in the survey? Were there others done?
This project is Stoughton specific.
Okay.
Stoughton is also involved in a regional project, which is in year 3, and we did get a lot of responses, but that was back in the fiscal year 23 that we did that survey, and we did get significant responses, and that survey was translated into 4 other languages.
Do you remember what the demographic on that previous survey was?
I don't, but I can find out.
I think it's really interesting how narrow this demographic
Yes.
is.
Yeah, especially since, Stoughton is one of the most diverse, economically, racially, culturally, across so many variables in the state. So it really is surprising that we didn't reach them.
And most people learned about the survey through Facebook, and you think about the demographics. Facebook is like
primarily white.
older, like
Primarily white, yeah.
I'm not surprised to see that the age of it either.
Yeah.
Only because, young families, young parents, it's like you're in the weeds, like
yeah, absolutely.
that. You're not thinking about climate change, and you're thinking day to day of getting things done with school, and so I'm not surprised to hear that the older demographic has more time to kind of think about that stuff and do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and admittedly, it was a long survey, and I apologize for that. we're gonna work on that.
That was actually my feedback on it. I was like, I started it and then I famously finished it during work hours.
Yeah.
I should have been doing something else. And
That's when you've had time, right? I'm sure you
exactly.
So it's kind of related to your work.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, look I can share it with you guys. It was a little bit long. And then, coming back to it was tricky. And then I'm a
That's
remote
your feedback
worker,
too.
so I spend most of my day on the computer, and I don't want to go back to a computer after. So if I can't be finished on my phone, then I wouldn't have gone back to it.
Yeah.
About the surveys, and it's long, can you have something so that if they want to answer more questions, they can click here. Otherwise, they go on to the next topic. Can that be done?
Yes, I think we made all of the questions optional, so you can skip any that you
Well,
wanted.
that's not what I mean. Like a topic of a general category of questions.
Yeah.
And if somebody's not interested, doesn't want to get in more into that category, then they can go on to the next one.
I'm not sure if the program we used has that functionality, but we should take a look at that. So I know there are some survey software that you can categorize things with sections, and so you can click and move around to the different sections. We used Survey 123, which is a GIS-based survey, so that people could plot points because we're asking about important resources in the community, and so we wanted people to have the ability to actually just, put a point down on a map. And I am not the GIS expert in the
What I'm
office.
thinking about is like a menu, and you
Yeah,
pick out what you want to talk
Right,
about, what you want to
right.
answer.
I know there is that functionality with some software. I don't know if we have that.
Probably.
as well.
If you answer, do you want to answer the more complicated question?
Yeah.
Once you click yes, you have questions that are hidden.
Yeah.
Just click yes.
Yeah, we need to work on our survey designs.
I think focus groups, I know, you
Yep.
tried that in Stoughton before, good.
Yes, so the first year we did
tool to
a
learn.
focus group, which was excellent. And that's actually, it's because the focus group went so well is why we have this advisory committee. Because it is a great way to learn more specific information. You have the expertise, that's why we've gathered you here, and we're so happy that you are willing to be involved. So that's,
If you're looking to, I think, reach out to more people in the community, maybe the Y is the place to start. Half the town is here,
it's always busy.
so I come here in the morning, early in the morning,
Yeah.
and it's crowded. My husband is here early in the morning. He was here today at 11. The parking lot was full. The parking lot's full now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it can reach a lot of different people here, all different ages.
Yeah.
And if you want to reach out to the youth, this is the place to do it too, not just like the high school. It's just a thought.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you mention at the last meeting that you guys have been in the schools?
So we are in the elementary schools. So we visit every fifth grade classroom in Stoughton and elsewhere twice. And we talk to them about climate change, water conservation, stormwater pollution.
And is it something that they have materials to take home to their parents?
Yeah. And so in phase one of this project, that's actually how we got the survey out to, the flood survey out to people, is we had a special brochure that went home with the kids and had a QR code that would take you right to the survey, which we did not have this time around.
I have to say, that's so cool that you're in the schools, and I thought, like we've talked about, obviously you need to incorporate the reality of the changing climate into, and all sorts of things related to environmental catastrophe into the curriculum in certain ways. And it seems to me like one of the things to talk about is water. At the younger ages, we don't want to talk about environmental collapse. But you talk about water, learning water conservation techniques, like, just these things aren't necessarily natural to children. I mean, they'll throw on the lights when there's blazing sun in the room, they'll do this, they'll do what I mean? Like all those sorts of things. It's really great that somebody other than mom and dad comes in and talks about it from a very, scientific point of view. So that's terrific.
And the brochure that they go home with, so it's two separate brochures, so that it's 2 touch points.
Yeah.
Actually sort of encourages the parents to talk to the students about what they learned. And so it's all age appropriate. They're not necessarily learning about the gloom and doom of climate change, but stormwater is important because we're gonna get more rain and, so we might have more water, so what do we do about that? They've got some hands-on activities to do in the classroom.
I love that as well. That's great.
Can you bring some of those brochures to the next meeting?
I can.
Yeah, we'd love to see this.
Yeah. Any other questions about the surveys? Do you have any?
People could see it and not fill it out, so. it doesn't
Yes,
mean
that's
they
true.
haven't seen it.
That's true. Yep. So based on the experience, some of the things, we are also looking for feedback on is, where do you get your trusted information? Where do your friends and family get their trusted information? Is it TikTok? I'm hearing a whole bunch of, people are getting their news from TikTok and YouTube or, Reels. So we're definitely looking to sort of expand our reach and figure out how we can reach more people in Stoughton and elsewhere. We also want to talk about some planning for the next couple meetings. So we've got the top topics of interest from the survey. So I'm just, we're wondering what would you like to sort of take a deeper dive into next time that we come together? Any topic on climate resilience, climate change.
Yeah, and I think of our postcard coming out soon, going to the whole watershed, and we're talking about extreme weather, and that the impact of heat is really the most dangerous to us all, and it's not, based on all those other hazards from storms, tornadoes, severe, storms, they all total do not add up to the number of deaths that are caused by heat. So it's kind of counterintuitive, though we know it's definitely getting worse and it's definitely different, but I think it's a wonderful learning for a community to come to understand that and what kinds of resources exist. Like in Boston, there's water pads and these mini water parks and playgrounds that are becoming more widely dispersed and